Origins and Ancient Sith. Long before the Jedi stood as guardians of peace in the galaxy, before the Republic lit its lanterns across the stars, there was darkness, primordial, patient, and waiting. This darkness was not evil in the way the Jedi would one day claim, but a force of passion, of will, of unrelenting hunger. It began with the Sith, not as a name whispered in fear across the core worlds, but as a people. Red-skinned, horned, tribal, ancient, the Sith species thrived in isolation on the dusty world of Korriban, ruled by mystics and warlords who communed with the Force in raw, unrefined ways. They did not seek balance. They sought dominion over the elements, over spirit and body, over life itself. But their fate shifted when the exiles came. During the 100-year darkness, a group of rogue Jedi had begun to explore the darker paths of the Force, alchemies, forbidden powers, techniques that twisted the body and soul. The Jedi cast them out, branding them traitors. These dark Jedi fled the Republic and crash-landed on Korriban, where they found the native Sith. Not enemies, but worshippers. To the Sith people, these exiles were gods incarnate. With their knowledge of the Force and superior technology, the Dark Jedi rose quickly as rulers, interbreeding with the Sith species and giving birth to a hybrid civilization, the Sith Empire. It was here that the term Sith evolved, no longer a species, but a philosophy, a cult of power, hate, and legacy. The teachings of these early Sith Lords revolved around dominance and strength. Peace was a lie. Only through passion could one truly know power. This became the Sith Code, a reversal of Jedi ideals. From this foundation, Sith society grew into a brutal, expansive empire rooted in conquest. It was ruled by Dark Lords who wore obsidian armor and wielded crimson blades crafted through alchemical means, long before kyber crystals were known to them. Their capital, Korriban, became a necropolis of tombs, each more massive than the last, housing sarcophagi of ancient tyrants whose spirits lingered like shadows in the sand. Among the most infamous of these early lords was Ajun Tapal, one of the original Dark Jedi exiles, who became the first Dark Lord of the Sith. His tomb still echoes with regret, for even he came to question the path he helped forge. But the fire had already spread. The Sith Empire began to stretch beyond Korriban, building temples on Zeost and forming a theocratic military state where Sith Lords ruled as demigods. It wasn't long before this empire clashed with the expanding Republic. During the Great Hyperspace War, a Sith Lord named Naga Sadow seized power through manipulation and murder. He orchestrated a war against the Republic using dark rituals to amplify his forces, even creating illusions so vast they fooled entire star systems. His ambition nearly brought the Republic to its knees, but Sadow's empire collapsed when he was betrayed from within. He fled to Yavin 4, building massive temples and continuing his experiments in the dark side alone. The Sith were thought to be destroyed, but the truth is that they simply retreated. Each Sith defeat only deepened their hatred, forged their teachings stronger, and scattered them like coals into the shadows of the galaxy. For though their temples crumbled and their armies burned, the Sith knew time was their ally. 1,000 years to them was but a blink. The seeds of their vengeance had already been planted. In these earliest times, the Sith were not just enemies of the Jedi, they were a mirror. Where the Jedi sought harmony and selflessness, the Sith embraced conflict and personal truth. This duality was more than moral. It was cosmic. The Sith believed in the survival of the strongest, the enlightenment that comes from suffering, and the sacredness of ambition. They did not shy away from desire, but believed it was the fire that could burn down the barriers to transcendence. They became masters of Sith sorcery, draining life from planets, binding souls to talismans, and crafting weapons that pulsed with malevolence. Korriban's tombs became more than graves. They were reliquaries of unholy power, guarded by undead spirits, traps, and creatures born of alchemical nightmares. The Sith also developed holocrons, intricate pyramidal devices that stored their teachings. But unlike Jedi holocrons, which opened to any seeker of knowledge, Sith holocrons required submission, blood, and often pain. To open one was to endure trials meant to break the weak. These devices would one day shape the destinies of fallen Jedi and would-be lords across millennia. Yet, even as the Sith Empire rose and fell, the core idea remained, that through passion, strength is born. Through strength, power is attained. Through power, victory is achieved. And through victory, chains are broken. The Force would set them free. As Jedi archivists would later discover, these ancient Sith did not fade easily into legend. Whispers of them persisted in forgotten tombs, cursed artifacts, and hidden cults that endured in secret. The dark side was patient, and it would rise again. The galaxy would one day forget their names, but their legacy would stretch like a shadow across the stars, waiting for the right moment to ignite again. In the silence of the tombs, the spirits of the ancient Sith still waited, watching, whispering, preparing. And somewhere deep beneath the sands of Korriban, a voice promised, "This is only the beginning." The Great Sith War and the Rise of Exar Kun. After the fall of Nagasado and the quieting of the Sith Empire's flames, the galaxy lulled itself into a fragile peace. But peace, for the Sith, was never an end. It was merely a moment to inhale, to sharpen the blade, to wait. And in the quiet corners of the galaxy, that darkness breathed again. This time not from the bloodlines of the Sith species, but from within the Jedi Order itself. The seeds of corruption had not been buried with the ancient lords. They had drifted like spores into the very temples of the light. The Republic, by now a vast network of planetary governments, had grown proud and complacent. The Jedi, though still noble, had begun to mistake stability for righteousness. In this atmosphere of unchecked dogma, two names would rise like distant thunder: Ulic Qel-Droma and Exar Kun. One, a gifted Jedi Knight with a deep sense of justice. The other, a brilliant Jedi apprentice whose thirst for knowledge knew no limits. Both would fall, and in their fall, the galaxy would burn. It began subtly, as it always does. Rumors spread of a dark cult forming on the distant world of Onderon, led by a queen whose bloodline bore traces of Sith magic. The Jedi dispatched a task force to investigate, among them Ulic Qel-Droma and his brother Kay. But what they found was not merely a political rebellion, it was a spiritual infection. Freedon Nad, a long-dead Sith Lord, had left behind a legacy of teachings, rituals, and artifacts. His influence had lingered like smoke in the stones of Onderon, and his followers had not only preserved his power, they had amplified it. Ulic's victories on Onderon were only temporary. Freedon Nad's spirit continued to whisper from beyond the grave, tempting those who lingered too long in his shadow. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, young Exar Kun, arrogant, curious, and brilliant, had begun to question the Jedi's rigid teachings. He delved into forbidden knowledge, drawn to the darker truths the Order refused to speak of. And when he uncovered the existence of ancient Sith tombs on Korriban, his fate was sealed. Exar Kun's descent was swift and theatrical. He traveled to Korriban and stood before the crumbling monuments of ancient lords. There, the ghost of Freedon Nad appeared, offering him power, understanding, and dominion over death itself. Kun accepted, not with the blind loyalty of a servant, but with the cold resolve of a conqueror. To prove his devotion to the dark side, he destroyed his former Jedi master and embraced the path fully. His body was changed, imbued with Sith alchemy. His saber, once a symbol of light, became a double-bladed weapon of crimson fury. Exar Kun was no longer a Jedi. He had become something older, something worse. Back on the Republic front, Ulic Qel-Droma's path had also begun to warp. Infiltrating the dark side sects in the hopes of bringing them down from within, he found himself slowly seduced by their power. The line between duty and desire blurred until it vanished entirely. He drank deeply from the same well as Exar Kun, and when the two finally met, they did not clash as enemies. They united as Sith. Declaring themselves heirs to the ancient legacy, they forged a new Sith brotherhood, not of species or empire, but of ideology. They rallied dark force users, Mandalorian warlords, and disillusioned Jedi alike. Their war swept across the galaxy like a storm. The Great Sith War, as it would come to be known, was unlike any that had come before. It was not merely a conflict of armies, it was a war of belief. Planets fell not only by invasion, but by conversion. Jedi temples were corrupted from within, their holocrons shattered or twisted to dark purposes. The Mandalorians, always drawn to strength, lent their fleets and warriors to the Sith cause. And at the center of it all stood Exar Kun, who sought not conquest alone, but apotheosis. He desired to become the very embodiment of the dark side, to reshape the Force itself in his image. He returned to Yavin 4, where Naga Sadow had once hidden in exile, and transformed it into his sanctum. There, he trained disciples in forbidden arts, essence transfer, Force drain, and rituals that could turn Jedi into stone or strip them of the Force entirely. The jungles echoed with screams and chanting, the temples bled red light, and one by one his enemies fell. But the dark side is a fire that consumes even its masters. As the war escalated, Ulic Qel-Droma's ambition unraveled. In a tragic confrontation, he killed his own brother Kay, the last tether to his former self. That act shattered him, and it was then that Nomi Sunrider, one of the Jedi's strongest warriors, used a rare ability to sever Ulic's connection to the Force completely. He fell to his knees, broken, blinded to the very power he had once worshipped. The war was turning. The Jedi, now united in purpose, launched a final strike against Exar Kun's stronghold on Yavin 4. Realizing his defeat was imminent, Kun performed one last desperate ritual. He sacrificed the souls of his followers, hundreds of dark acolytes, to trap his spirit in the temple itself, tethered to the mortal world by sheer hatred. His body died, but his essence remained, pulsing like a wound in the Force. The war ended, but the galaxy was scarred. Entire star systems had been devastated. Jedi numbers had dwindled. Trust in the Order began to erode, and deep in the shadows of Yavin 4, the ghost of Exar Kun waited, silent and watchful, for another age of weakness. This war, though forgotten by many, marked a critical evolution in Sith philosophy. No longer a race or empire, the Sith had become a contagion of ideology, a path walked by the fallen, the betrayed, the curious, a legacy of pain passed down not by blood but by belief. And while the Jedi celebrated their costly victory, the dark side knew better. For every light that burned, a shadow was cast, and in that shadow, the Sith would rise again. The Sith Triumvirate and the aftermath of Malachor V. In the long and fractured shadow left by the Great Sith War, the galaxy found itself once again grasping at the illusion of peace, but the wounds left by Exar Kun and Ulic Qel-Droma ran deep through the Force and the Republic alike. Among the ashes of that conflict rose a new storm, quiet at first, but far more insidious, fueled by the chaos of a war not yet finished. As the Jedi attempted to rebuild and the Republic clung to stability, an even darker age was about to descend. The Mandalorian Wars, driven by conquest and fire, had begun to ignite across the Outer Rim. These warlike nomads, clad in Beskar and worshippers of battle, launched a campaign of brutal invasions, slaughtering entire systems in their path. And while the Jedi Council hesitated, choosing caution over intervention, two young Jedi Knights defied the Order's inaction and stepped into the fire. One was bold, charismatic, and fiercely independent. His name was Revan. The other, ever loyal and steadfast, was Malak. Together, they led a breakaway faction of Jedi into battle, becoming heroes of the Republic and saviors of countless worlds. But war changes everything, and Malachor V was the crucible that would shatter the future. At the final, cataclysmic battle of the Mandalorian Wars, Revan unleashed a superweapon known as the Mass Shadow Generator, an ancient relic of terrifying power that collapsed gravity itself, pulling entire fleets into oblivion. Mandalore the Ultimate was killed. The Mandalorians surrendered, but something else died on that battlefield too. Revan's belief in the Jedi, and perhaps even his soul, for deep beneath Malachor's crust lay Sith ruins that pulsed with a dark hunger. Revan, drawn to them, discovered teachings and holocrons that had survived since the time of Naga Sadow. And in those tombs, the Sith found him once more. Alongside Malak, Revan fell to the dark side, seduced by the ancient knowledge and the promise of order through domination. He declared himself Dark Lord of the Sith and created a new empire, rallying ships, soldiers, and fallen Jedi under a crimson banner. Thus began the Jedi Civil War, where Revan's brilliance as a tactician and his new identity as a Sith Lord brought the Republic to its knees. Entire planets defected to his cause. The Jedi were slaughtered or turned, and Malak, once his most loyal ally, eventually betrayed Revan in a bid for power, firing on his flagship and leaving him for dead. But the Force had other plans. Revan survived, his memories shattered, his identity erased by the Jedi Council, who attempted to mold him into a weapon against Malak's rising tyranny. Revan's redemption, his journey to reclaim himself and ultimately destroy Malak, is a legend unto itself. But while the Republic hailed his return as a turning point, something darker still lingered beneath the surface. For even as Revan fought to undo his own sins, he remembered whispers in the dark, secrets of a greater threat waiting in the unknown regions. A Sith Empire, ancient and hidden, had been the true source of his fall. And Revan, realizing the fight was not over, vanished into the stars to confront it. In his absence, the Jedi Order collapsed further. Too many had died, too many had been broken, and into this void of leadership and hope crept a new terror, the Sith Triumvirate. Unlike the grand empires of the past, this new order ruled not through planets or armies, but through silence, fear, and extinction. 3 Dark Lords, Darth Trier, Darth Nihilus, and Darth Sion, emerged from the shadows. Each embodied a different form of darkness. Trier, once Jedi Master Kreia, had turned against both Jedi and Sith, seeing betrayal as the only constant truth. She wielded knowledge like a blade, seeking to unravel the Force itself. Sion, the Lord of Pain, was a shattered corpse held together by hatred, unable to die, his body a mockery of life. And Nihilus, the Lord of Hunger, was barely a man at all, an echo, a void in the Force, who devoured entire planets to satisfy a hunger that could never be quenched. Together, they formed a triumvirate whose mission was not to conquer the Jedi, but to erase them. One by one, Jedi were hunted and killed. Temples were emptied, holocrons destroyed. The Force itself seemed to recoil. The Jedi Purge had begun. Among the last surviving Jedi was the Exile, a woman who had fought beside Revan in the Mandalorian Wars and severed her connection to the Force at Malachor 5. Her journey to reconnect with the Force, to understand the nature of pain, absence, and redemption would become a turning point in galactic history. Through her battles with Sion and Nihilus, the last echoes of the Triumvirate were silenced. Darth Trier, once her teacher, fell by her hand in the depths of Malachor's wound, and yet the darkness did not end. For Malachor itself, with its cracked surface and its gravity wells still echoing from the mass shadow generator, remained a monument to Sith devastation. The scars it left on the galaxy and the soul would never fully fade, and as the Exile too vanished into the unknown regions in search of Revan, the Sith once again slipped into myth, hiding, waiting, learning. Their war was not over, it had simply changed shape. Darth Bane and the Rule of Two. In the centuries that followed the cataclysm of Malachor and the silent extinction wrought by the Sith Triumvirate, the galaxy was left in uneasy balance, a fragile period of light not born from triumph but from exhaustion. The Jedi Order, battered and diminished, slowly rebuilt its numbers and its temples, convinced that the Sith were finally vanquished, relegated to whispers and shadows. But darkness is never so easily destroyed. It waits, learns, and evolves. Beneath the surface of a seemingly recovering galaxy, the Sith were not extinct. They were festering in their own madness. The Brotherhood of Darkness, a vast gathering of Sith Lords, acolytes, and dark side cults, had begun to coalesce under the leadership of Lord Khan, who sought to unify the Sith against the Jedi in a final war to dominate the galaxy. But his unity was hollow, built on ego and convenience rather than true strength. The Sith Lords, though nominally allied, bickered endlessly, sabotaged one another's victories, and thirsted not for galactic peace, but for personal power. It was in this age of arrogance and decay that a miner's son named Dessel rose from the brutality of the Outer Rim, fueled by a lifetime of cruelty, isolation, and an instinctive connection to the dark side. Taking the name Darth Bane, he entered the Sith ranks and immediately recognized what the others could not, that the Brotherhood was a cancer upon the Sith legacy. There was no power in chaos, no truth in sharing the dark side like children passing around a toy. The dark side, Bane believed, was a singular, infinite force that should be channeled by one will alone. Many Sith diluted it. One could master it. Drawing from the ancient teachings of Revan and the holocrons of long-dead Sith Lords, Bane developed a new doctrine, the rule of two, one master to embody the power and one apprentice to crave it. No armies of lords, no brotherhood, just lineage, secrecy, purpose. In the eyes of Bane, true strength came not from numbers, but from refined evolution, each apprentice surpassing their master, growing stronger, more cunning, more ruthless with each generation. To initiate his new order, Bane did what few would dare. He destroyed the Brotherhood of Darkness in one decisive stroke. On the fields of Ruusan, Lord Khan and his inner circle unleashed a weapon of terrifying magnitude, the Thought Bomb, a sphere of pure dark side energy meant to annihilate the Jedi gathered against them. But Bane, having manipulated them into activating it, knew the truth. It would destroy not just their enemies, but themselves, trapping their souls in eternal torment. The bomb detonated, vaporizing nearly every Force sensitive in the area and creating a wound in the Force that would echo for millennia. Only Bane and a young girl named Xana survived. He took her as his apprentice, and thus the new Sith Order began, not as an empire, but as a secret. From that day forward, the Sith would live in the shadows, shedding the arrogance of the past and embracing patience as a weapon. No longer would they challenge the Jedi openly. Instead, they would infect politics, infiltrate institutions, manipulate from within. This was Bane's grand plan, a generational strategy designed to slowly corrode the Republic until the Sith could strike from within and claim power not through brute force, but through inevitability. Bane and Xana vanished into the outer systems, training in secret, passing on knowledge, and perfecting the rule of two. Bane's legacy would stretch far beyond his death, carried through a chain of Sith Lords that would culminate in a name the galaxy would one day know well, Sidious. But long before that, the galaxy forgot the Sith. The Jedi, believing themselves victorious at Ruusan, built a temple over the ashes of that battlefield. They reformed their order, tightened their codes, and taught their younglings that the Sith were extinct. This illusion of peace, carefully maintained, would prove to be their undoing. For the true Sith had not been destroyed. They had been reborn, forged in secret, sharpened in patience, and deep in the shadows of the Outer Rim, the legacy of Darth Bane waited, quiet, focused, eternal. Plagueis, Sidious, and the path to the Phantom Menace. Centuries passed, and the Sith clung to the shadows like parasites with infinite patience, their legacy preserved through the sacred and ruthless rule of two. One master, one apprentice, each generation tempered by secrecy and shaped by ambition. The Jedi grew complacent, blinded by their own doctrine, and the Republic drifted into stagnation, bloated with bureaucracy and political decay. It was in this fragile age that the Sith made their most decisive move, not with sabers drawn, but with whispers, lies, and the quiet suffocation of corruption. From this long, coiled lineage came Darth Plagueis the Wise, a moon of vast intellect and terrifying subtlety. Unlike many Sith before him, Plagueis did not seek domination through war, but through science, finance, and the manipulation of life itself. He was a master of midi-chlorian research, obsessed with unlocking the deepest secrets of the Force, including immortality. He experimented in private with the unnatural prolonging of life, creating life from nothing, and altering the balance between death and rebirth. But above all, he believed in the Sith grand plan. His role was not to dominate the Republic, but to dismantle it so thoroughly that it would collapse into the hands of the Sith without a single shot fired. To achieve this, he would need an apprentice worthy of the new age, and so he found a young human from Naboo, gifted, manipulative, and venomously brilliant. His name was Sheev Palpatine, and in the underworld of the Sith, he became Darth Sidious. To the galaxy, Palpatine was a senator with a keen eye for diplomacy and a mild smile that inspired trust. But behind that mask, Sidious burned with cold hatred and a vision so precise it would take decades to execute. Under Plagueis' training, he learned the art of patience, of political maneuvering, of bending galactic institutions towards decay, and then, true to the Sith path, he struck his master down in his sleep, taking all that Plagueis had taught him and casting aside the one who taught it. Darth Sidious became the sole Dark Lord of the Sith, now carrying the full weight of Bane's grand plan into the final stages. He sought an apprentice to serve him, to act as his weapon while he remained the unseen hand. He found a Dathomirian Zabrak, a child bred for hate and forged in agony. His name was Maul, and he became Sidious's blade. A silent assassin trained not to rule, but to kill. But Maul was not Sidious's only contingency. Behind the curtain of the Galactic Senate, Sidious began to orchestrate conflicts, playing both sides, forming alliances with criminal cartels, and manipulating the Trade Federation to destabilize outer systems. Everything was leading to one moment, the blockade of Naboo. With the Jedi dispatched to mediate the crisis and Queen Amidala forced into galactic view, Sidious positioned himself to ascend, first to Chancellor, then to Emperor. The pieces were moving, and no one saw the hand behind them. Meanwhile, Maul was unleashed, revealing the Sith to the Jedi for the first time in 1,000 years. His ambush on Tatooine and later duel on Naboo were not meant to win. They were meant to announce. "At last," whispered the shadows, "we will reveal ourselves to the Jedi." Maul's duel with Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn and his Padawan Obi-Wan Kenobi ended in blood. Maul struck down Qui-Gon, only to be bisected and cast into the void by Obi-Wan, presumed dead. But death, as always, is a temporary thing in the dark side. Maul survived in the bowels of the galaxy, fueled by rage, slowly descending into madness. Yet Sidious moved on, unfazed, always looking ahead, for Maul was merely a pawn and the game had only begun. The Republic, fractured and riddled with greed, had elected Palpatine as Supreme Chancellor. The Jedi sensed the dark side gathering, but could not see its source. The clone army was already being conceived. War was on the horizon. And behind every event, every crisis, every death, the Sith smiled. The shadows had waited 1,000 years. Now they stood at the threshold of ultimate power, and the Jedi, blinded by tradition, were already too late. The Clone Wars and the fall of the Jedi. The galaxy teetered on the edge of chaos, and the Sith stood poised to strike. Not from behind a fleet of warships, but from behind masks of diplomacy, robes of office, and 1,000 lies. Darth Sidious, now Supreme Chancellor Palpatine, had fully embedded himself within the heart of the Republic, holding the galaxy's pulse between his fingers while the Jedi still wandered in fog, searching for shadows they could not name. He had engineered the Clone Wars with cold precision, playing both sides like a master conductor. On one hand, the Republic, led by Palpatine and backed by an army of clone soldiers grown on Kamino under mysterious orders. On the other, the Confederacy of Independent Systems, led by Count Dooku, once a Jedi, now the Sith Lord Darth Tyrannus, and Sidious's secret apprentice. Their war was never about territory. It was a crucible, a smokescreen, a forge for fear and division. Planets burned, heroes fell, and the Jedi, once symbols of peace, were transformed into generals of war. With every battle, their code eroded, their clarity blurred. They were no longer defenders of peace. They were soldiers of a political machine they barely understood. And at the center of this unraveling stood one young Jedi, gifted, conflicted, and chosen by prophecy, Anakin Skywalker. The Clone Wars were his battlefield, his proving ground, and his undoing. Sidious watched him closely, stoking his anger, whispering doubt, planting seeds of mistrust and loss. He orchestrated events to isolate Anakin, fostering his bond with Chancellor Palpatine, inflaming his fear of losing Padme, and offering subtle nudges toward forbidden power. Meanwhile, Dooku trained his own dark disciples and unleashed new terrors upon the galaxy. The mechanical monstrosity General Grievous, the Night Sisters' dark magic, and secret plots to weaken the Republic's spine. But Dooku, like Maul before him, was never the heir. He was a tool, a stepping stone, and when the time came, Sidious cast him aside without hesitation, offering his life to Anakin in a moment that would forever stain the young Jedi's soul. With Dooku dead and Anakin spiraling into desperation, the final act of the Sith Grand Plan began. Palpatine revealed himself to Anakin, not as Chancellor, not as a politician, but as the Sith Lord who had orchestrated the entire war, and he offered Anakin what no Jedi could, the power to save the ones he loved from death. That offer was not rejected, it was embraced. In the dark of the Jedi Temple, Anakin knelt before Sidious and was given a new name, Darth Vader. In that moment, the Sith legacy passed to a new vessel, not born of tradition but of love, twisted into fear. And then, like a blade across the throat of light, Order 66 was given. Across the stars, clone troopers turned on their Jedi commanders, friends became executioners, masters died with sabers still clipped to their belts. The Jedi Temple burned, children slaughtered, and the Force cried out in silence. The purge was near total. Only a few survived, Yoda, Obi-Wan, and scattered exiles who went into hiding. Sidious declared the Republic reborn as the Galactic Empire, with himself as Emperor. He ruled with the Senate as a mask, but his power was absolute. Darth Vader became his enforcer, a symbol of fear clad in black iron, haunting the shadows of the galaxy, hunting the remnants of his former order. The grand plan was complete. The Sith had won. They had achieved in secrecy what brute force could never accomplish. The Jedi were broken, the Republic devoured from within, and the galaxy, trembling, no longer remembered a time without war. Yet even in the heart of the Empire, all was not still, for the Force never forgets imbalance, and deep within Vader, beneath the armor and the pain, the man who once was Anakin Skywalker still flickered like a dying star. The Sith believed their dominion eternal, but the light, though hidden, had not been extinguished, and its return would come from the most unlikely of places. The reign of the Sith Empire, Sidious and Vader. With the Jedi all but extinguished and the Republic reformed into the Galactic Empire, the Sith no longer needed to whisper. They now spoke through decrees, through fleets of Star Destroyers, through the chilling presence of stormtroopers on every world that once knew freedom. Darth Sidious, now Emperor Palpatine, ruled the galaxy with an iron will cloaked in parliamentary pretense, but his power was not political, it was spiritual, dark, ancient. He was no mere ruler, he was the culmination of 1,000 years of Sith design, the final movement in a symphony of betrayal and deception. By his side stood Darth Vader, a monstrous figure clad in obsidian armor, breathing like a machine, killing like a god. He was no longer Anakin Skywalker in body or soul, at least that is what Sidious told him. Vader had become the sword of the Empire, hunting the last of the Jedi across the stars, one death at a time, leaving behind only smoldering temples and buried truths. And yet, despite their victory, the Sith still feared the light. Palpatine knew that balance, once tipped so violently, would eventually swing back. To prevent this, he formed the Inquisitorius, a secretive order of dark side adepts, many of them fallen Jedi, tasked with rooting out any remaining Force-sensitive children before they could ever discover what they were. These Inquisitors scoured the Outer Rim, torturing, converting, or killing, their minds twisted by Vader's brutal hand. But even as the Sith ruled openly, they remained paranoid. For Palpatine's empire was not built on unity. It was built on control, fear, and obedience. Each system was a powder keg, each senator a potential traitor, and in this environment, rebellion began to fester. Small at first, just murmurs in smoky cantinas, hidden messages broadcast from unknown sources, but growing. The Sith responded with terror. Entire cities were leveled to find a single Jedi. Families were silenced for harboring Force-sensitive children. And Vader, despite his unmatched power, began to feel the cold emptiness of a throne he could never sit upon. He was not Sidious's heir, he was his instrument, his prisoner. The promise of saving Padme had rotted into ashes, and in its place stood only a mausoleum of regret. Yet Palpatine remained consumed with power, not just ruling, but transcending. His studies into the dark side grew more arcane, reaching into secrets of life preservation, cloning, and the manipulation of essence. He sought to defy death itself, using ancient Sith rituals and unnatural experiments. Meanwhile, Vader began to search for his own answers. Not to overthrow his master, not yet, but to understand the full extent of what had been taken from him. He built his fortress on Mustafar, atop the place of his greatest defeat, surrounding himself with relics of Sith lore and the agony of his own past. The Sith, once a scattered ideology of hatred and survival, had become the beating heart of the galaxy's fear. Their rule was not just enforced, it was believed to be eternal, but beneath the surface cracks formed. The Jedi had not all died. Hope had not been fully extinguished, and in secret corners of the galaxy, new names began to rise, names the Sith could not predict. The Force, forever in motion, was gathering its answer. The spark of rebellion and the fall of the Sith. The galaxy had groaned under the weight of tyranny for nearly 2 decades, but darkness, no matter how absolute, cannot suppress the will to resist forever. The seeds of rebellion, planted in hidden cells, whispered in alleys, transmitted in coded signals, began to sprout into something greater. A loose confederation of insurgents and idealists, senators and smugglers, warriors and dreamers came together to form the Rebel Alliance. What began as scattered uprisings coalesced into a movement fueled not by vengeance but by hope, and this hope was not abstract. It had a name, a presence, a purpose. Obi-Wan Kenobi, long thought dead, watched from the desert sands of Tatooine, guarding the last flicker of Anakin Skywalker's legacy. A boy named Luke. The Force, dormant and grieving, stirred again in the presence of this new Skywalker, whose destiny had been etched into prophecy before he was born. As the rebellion fought skirmishes and gathered allies, the Sith Empire remained entrenched. The Emperor's power was at its height, his reach nearly absolute. Yet his obsession had shifted, not merely maintaining control, but eliminating any threat to the Sith legacy. He sensed a new presence in the Force, raw and untrained, and he knew its name. Luke Skywalker became a beacon, not just to the rebellion, but to the Force itself. Sidious sought to turn him, to replace Vader with a younger, more malleable vessel. Vader, meanwhile, sensed something deeper in Luke, a mirror of himself before the fall, a tether to the man he had once been. As the battles intensified, from Scarif to Yavin, from Hoth to Endor, Luke's journey unfolded in parallel with the crumbling of the Sith's illusions. He trained with Yoda on Dagobah, resisted the dark side's law, and faced his father in a confrontation that echoed across the galaxy and within the Force itself. In the throne room of the second Death Star, the final act of the Sith's 1,000-year plan was played out, not with fleets or armies, but with a father, a son, and the weight of legacy. Sidious offered Luke the same temptation he had offered Anakin: power, protection, vengeance, and just as before, the darkness nearly prevailed. Luke struck in anger, wounded Vader, and stood on the precipice of becoming the very thing he fought. But unlike his father, Luke stepped back. He threw down his weapon, he chose compassion, and in that moment, the Sith's greatest weapon, fear, was broken. It was not Luke who destroyed the Sith. It was Anakin Skywalker, long buried beneath the armor and pain, who rose one final time. In an act of redemption forged in love and sacrifice, he seized the Emperor and cast him into the abyss, destroying his master and himself in the process. The Death Star fell, the Empire fractured, and the Sith, who had ruled the galaxy through lies and domination for a millennium, were gone. Anakin died in his son's arms, not as Darth Vader, but as a Jedi, fulfilling the prophecy that had once damned him. With his death, the rule of two was broken, the lineage of Bane ended, and the Force, long unbalanced, breathed again. Yet even in this moment of victory, the darkness did not disappear. The Sith had been defeated, but the shadow they cast remained in the corners of forgotten worlds, in relics buried deep, in whispers passed down by those still loyal to the dark. For evil does not die, it sleeps, and as the galaxy celebrated its liberation, the Force trembled with knowledge. The story was not over. The rise of the Sith Eternal and the Final Order. The fall of the Empire brought celebration to a galaxy long strangled by fear, but peace in the Force is never permanent, and the death of the Sith Lords did not erase the ancient rot that had crept into the bones of history. Unknown to the victors of Endor, the darkness had not been destroyed, it had merely changed form, retreating once again into the farthest reaches of the stars, beyond charted space, beyond memory. There, on the hidden world of Exegol, deep within the unknown regions and veiled by navigational anomalies, the Sith endured. Not in the form of lords and apprentices, but as a cult, ancient, fanatical, and eternal. The Sith Eternal had been preparing for generations, bound not by blood but by ideology, worshipping the dark side not as a tool, but as a god. They preserved the secrets of the Sith Order, studied forbidden rituals, constructed star destroyers in silence beneath lightning-lit skies, and waited for the return of their master, Darth Sidious, who had not perished on the second Death Star, but had transferred his essence into a broken, cloned body through the unnatural powers he had long sought to master. He returned as a phantom, a decaying shell of power sustained by dark science and ancient magic. The galaxy believed him dead, but in the void he gathered strength, orchestrating the rise of the First Order through proxies like Supreme Leader Snoke, a puppet infused with fragments of Sidious's consciousness, bred in vats beneath Exegol, designed to manipulate events from afar. Through Snoke, Sidious guided the corruption of Ben Solo, heir to the Skywalker legacy, and twisted him into Kylo Ren, a vessel of rage and doubt. The First Order, a militarized echo of the old empire, rose swiftly, striking the New Republic, destroying its capital, and plunging the galaxy once again into war. Yet Sidious wanted more than chaos. He wanted resurrection, not only of himself, but of the Sith as an empire. Beneath Exegol's storms, the Final Order was born, a hidden fleet of planet-killing star destroyers, each capable of mass annihilation, each carrying the banner of the Sith reborn. Sidious declared himself the one true emperor, not of the Republic, not of the Empire, but of all that ever was. Yet again, the Force answered, not with an army, but with a spark. A scavenger named Rey, whose past had been obscured and abandoned, emerged as a beacon. Her journey led her through darkness, doubt, and revelation until she discovered the horrifying truth. She was the granddaughter of Darth Sidious, his legacy not just ideological, but genetic. He offered her the throne, the Sith's full inheritance, the power of all dark side users who had come before. But Rey, like Luke before her, refused. And in that final confrontation on Exegol, amid Sith chanting and thunderclaps, the cycle reached its crescendo. With the aid of the redeemed Ben Solo and the spiritual presence of generations of Jedi behind her, Rey stood against Sidious, not as his blood, but as his antithesis. The Force, now balanced through light and darkness intertwined, surged through her, and she turned his own power against him. Sidious was destroyed, utterly, finally, without escape. The Sith Eternal were vaporized with him, their temples reduced to ruins, their cult silenced in a single blinding strike. The Final Order was annihilated. The war was over. The Sith, whose shadows had stretched across millennia, were no more, and as Rey took on the name Skywalker, burying the sabers of Luke and Leia in the Tatooine sands beneath twin suns, the Force itself sighed in release. The rule of two was shattered, the cycle of master and apprentice was broken, and though darkness would always exist, the ancient legacy of the Sith, rooted in domination, fear, and betrayal, had finally reached its end, for now. Legacy of the Sith, influence, relics, and what remains. Though the Sith Order has been extinguished, its temples collapsed, its bloodline severed, and its grand plan unraveled, their legacy lingers like smoke after fire, stubborn and clinging to the corners of the galaxy where light rarely shines. Evil, after all, is not always an army or a name. It is an idea, and ideas do not die so easily. The influence of the Sith still echoes in forgotten places, shattered holocrons buried beneath the sands of Moraband, ritual blades rusting in the ruins of Dromund Kaas, tombs sealed but never truly silent on Korriban, Malachor, and Yavin 4. These sites, steeped in dark energy, continue to call to those who seek forbidden truths, treasure hunters, wayward force users, and ambitious warlords who mistake ancient corruption for divine right. Even as the galaxy rebuilds, fragments of Sith teachings remain hidden in black market archives, in cults that rebrand their devotion under new names, in isolated systems where legends grow in the absence of law. Artifacts imbued with hate, talismans, masks, ancient texts still pulse with the residue of centuries of pain, waiting for someone desperate enough to reach out and listen. And perhaps most hauntingly, the philosophy of the Sith, though formally extinguished, remains seductive. The desire for control, the temptation of power, the belief that suffering unlocks strength. These are not concepts unique to Sith Lords. They are human impulses, buried deep in the soul of every being, and they do not vanish with victory. Rey Skywalker, the final inheritor of the Jedi legacy, now walks a path unshackled by tradition, free to forge a new understanding of the Force, one that honors balance rather than opposition. But she too must carry the burden of history, for even in peace there will always be those who question, who seek more, who look upon the ruins of the Sith and wonder what might be rebuilt. The rule of two is broken, but the temptation to control it again will never fully disappear. The galaxy is vast and time is long. Somewhere, perhaps on a distant moon or deep beneath an ancient mountain, a whisper remains, a scar in the Force, a name scratched into obsidian, a presence, faint but breathing. For the Sith were never just individuals, they were inevitability given form, and though the line is broken, though the temples lie empty and the masters are gone, the dark side waits, not to conquer, but to be chosen again. And so the cycle sleeps, not ends, for every age births its own shadows, and every light must one day cast them. And should the Sith rise again, as they have always risen before, the Force will rise to meet them, as it always has, as it always will. Sith philosophy and the Code revisited. To understand the Sith is to gaze into the mirror of the Force and see not simply evil, but conviction sharpened by pain, belief hardened into obsession. Long after their empire crumbled and their names were carved into forgotten stone, the Sith Code still lingers, 5 lines etched into the dark heart of every apprentice who dared to walk their path. Peace is a lie, there is only passion. Through passion I gain strength. Through strength I gain power. Through power I gain victory. Through victory my chains are broken. The Force shall free me. These words, simple yet burning with intent, formed the core of Sith philosophy for millennia, and they were never mere dogma. They were a weapon. The Jedi taught detachment, serenity, balance, and compassion, urging their disciples to become vessels of the Force, quiet and harmonious. But the Sith rejected this surrender. To them, emotion was not a threat. It was the key. Passion fueled ambition, ambition forged strength, and strength unlocked the raw truth of the universe. That power belongs to those who take it. This worldview did not arise from madness but from observation. The Sith saw a galaxy defined by conflict, and in that conflict they saw clarity. Pain was the crucible through which purpose emerged. Love became obsession, fear became focus, anger became fire, and in fire, they were reborn. Their pursuit of power was not always selfish. Some sought to impose order, believing that only through absolute control could peace be maintained. Others were consumed by hatred, vengeance, or the lust for immortality. But beneath every motive lay the same unspoken truth. The galaxy is ruled not by morality, but by will. The Jedi said the Force must be balanced. The Sith said the Force must be mastered. This ideological divide was not mere philosophy. It shaped the course of history, leading to the construction and collapse of civilizations, the rise and fall of empires, the shattering of families, and the forging of tyrants. And while the Jedi placed their faith in community, in the Order, the Sith looked inward. They believed that only the individual mattered, that to be truly free, one must break every chain, even the ones forged by tradition, loyalty, or love. This is why betrayal was so common among them. Apprentices were expected to kill their masters. Masters ruled through fear, not affection. The rule of two was built not on harmony, but on a deadly rhythm of succession. This cycle of rise and overthrow was not a flaw, it was the point. In conflict, the weak perished and the strong endured. Evolution in its most brutal form. Yet this same cycle also proved the Sith's greatest weakness, for while their philosophy sharpened the blade, it left no room for trust, for legacy, for unity. Every Sith victory planted the seed of future collapse. Darth Bane knew this and tried to perfect the design. Sidious believed he had completed it, but both fell, not because they lacked strength, but because the very power they wielded isolated them. The darkness, for all its promise, is cold, and in the end, even the mightiest Sith stood alone. Still, their code survives, in echoes, in relics, in the thoughts of those who find the Jedi's teachings lacking and look to the past with dangerous curiosity. The Sith offered clarity in a chaotic world. They asked a question that still tempts many. What if the only thing standing between you and freedom is the strength to take it? And while their temples are buried and their line extinguished, the code remains, waiting, whispering, daring someone to believe again. The dark side beyond the Sith, cults, witches, and heretics. Though the Sith were the most infamous wielders of the dark side, they were never its only voice. The Force, in its shadowed form, has always called to those willing to listen without fear, without chains, without the illusion of balance, and across the galaxy, from poisoned swamps to forgotten moons, others answered that call. Cults, covens, heretics, and prophets who touched the same darkness but walked their own paths. Long before the Republic mapped the stars, the Night Sisters of Dathomir communed with the dark side, not through saber or doctrine, but through ancient magic, weaving spells of shadow, illusion, and death. They lived in matriarchal clans, guided by visions and blood rituals, binding spirits to flesh, raising the dead, and mastering powers that the Jedi considered unnatural. Yet to the Night Sisters, it was simply nature, untamed, wild, and feminine in fury. They served no master. They bent the Force to their will, not for conquest, but for survival. And in their defiance of both Jedi and Sith, they became a testament to the dark side's versatility. Beyond Dathomir, secret cults arose throughout history, remnants of ancient Sith offshoots or entirely new philosophies forged in isolation. On Malachor, the ruins of a great superweapon pulsed with residual hate, drawing pilgrims and madmen alike who believed suffering was sacred. On Jeddah, in the catacombs beneath the holy city, heretical Force cults once debated the very nature of darkness and light, seeing them not as opposites, but as two halves of the same breath. The prophets of the dark side, who served the Empire in secret, saw Palpatine as a god and distorted Sith teachings into religious dogma, offering prophecy and divination wrapped in fear. Even the cultists of Exegol, the Sith Eternal, were not Sith in title, but followers of its gospel, chanting in subterranean temples, preserving rituals long after their authors had turned to dust. These dark side adherents, though unaligned, shared a common thread: the rejection of Jedi limitations. To them, the Force was not a teacher, but a storm. It was to be summoned, bound, unleashed, not meditated upon like some distant star. Their practices were often brutal, their outcomes unpredictable, yet in their chaos lay raw insight. Not every heretic sought galactic power. Some simply wanted to see beyond the veil of mortality, to defy death, to speak with the past, to taste truth unfiltered by the Jedi Code, and the Force, in its indifference, responded. It gave visions, madness, miracles. The Jedi dismissed them as dangerous. The Sith saw them as threats to their purity, but the dark side belongs to none, and even now, in the aftermath of the Sith's final fall, there are still those who hear its whispers, not to build empires, but to chase the edges of understanding. Whether they are witches, monks, or mad prophets, their stories remind us that the Force is larger than any order, older than any code, and in the places where light fails, where law retreats, and where pain lingers, the dark side still breathes, wild, unclaimed, and very much alive. Sith artifacts, holocrons, and temples of power. The Sith may be gone, their lineage shattered and their names buried beneath layers of time and ruin, but the relics they left behind still pulse with malevolence, silent yet waiting. Across the galaxy lie forgotten vaults and crumbling sanctuaries, each one a scar carved into the flesh of the Force, filled with whispers and curses that have not faded. These artifacts, blades, masks, holocrons, talismans, are not mere objects. They are echoes, vessels of memory and hatred, imbued with the very essence of those who once wielded them. Sith holocrons, shaped like dark pyramids, etched with runes, are among the most dangerous. Unlike their Jedi counterparts, which open to gentle minds seeking knowledge, Sith holocrons require power, pain, and submission. They are guardians of secrets not meant for balance, but for domination, housing the teachings of long-dead lords like Bane, Revan, and Nihilus, who speak still through flickering projections, taunting, tempting, instructing. Some holocrons are intelligent, infused with a shard of their creator's soul, and they do not give freely. They test the will of the seeker, fail and they corrupt, succeed and they consume. Elsewhere, the weapons of the Sith remain, blades forged with alchemy and ritual, burning red with synthetic or corrupted kyber crystals that scream when activated. These sabers, passed from master to apprentice through betrayal and blood, are more than tools. They are symbols of ideology, each one a lineage of violence encased in metal. The mask of Darth Nihilus, said to carry his voice even after his death, is whispered to drive the weak mad. The ring of Darth Nihilus is rumored to unlock powers of resurrection. The amulet of Marka Ragnos can amplify the dark side to terrifying levels, poisoning those who wear it with visions of conquest. And scattered among them are the scrolls and tablets, the incantations and rituals that even modern Force users barely comprehend, spells to bind spirits, crush minds, shatter bodies, and defile nature itself. But these artifacts do not float unguarded in space. They rest within tombs and temples, built not for worship, but for containment. The Valley of the Dark Lords on Korriban, also known as Moraband, holds sarcophagi the size of starships, each one entombing a Sith Lord whose spirit still lingers, ready to curse or enslave any who dare disturb their rest. Malakor's ruins are littered with petrified remains of Force users who unleashed forbidden weapons. Dromund Kaas, the former capital of a forgotten Sith empire, is wrapped in perpetual storm where the very atmosphere seems to tremble with rage. The ancient temples on Yavin 4, constructed by Naga Sado and later used by Exar Kun, are still filled with traps, illusions, and lingering echoes of past horrors. These places are not ruins, they are warnings. Yet throughout history, Force users, historians, cultists, and the desperate have sought them out, believing they can control what was never meant to be controlled. The Jedi, when they still stood strong, tried to collect and lock away these relics, storing them in deep vaults or hurling them into stars. But destruction is never total. Somehow, the dark always survives. Even in the New Republic era, fragments resurface, artifacts auctioned in black markets, temples unearthed by accident, holocrons activating themselves when proximity to pain is near. Each relic carries a weight, a history, a hunger, and those who seek them must ask themselves, do they seek power to protect or to dominate, for the Sith may be gone, but their objects endure, and through these artifacts their voices still speak, their lessons still tempt, their curse still lingers. The Rule of Two, a history of master and apprentice. From the smouldering aftermath of the Brotherhood of Darkness and the battlefield of Ruusan came one of the most enduring and feared doctrines in Sith history, crafted not from ambition alone, but from bitter clarity. Darth Bane, standing as the lone survivor of a war that proved the futility of shared power, gave birth to a new law that would shape the Sith for 1,000 years, the Rule of Two. One master to embody power, one apprentice to crave it. No more armies of dark acolytes, no more councils bloated with betrayal. The Sith would now walk a narrow and secret path, hidden from the Jedi, evolving through conflict, refined through generational sacrifice. The Rule of Two was not just a method, it was a crucible designed to sharpen the Sith into something leaner, colder, more dangerous. Each apprentice was expected to one day rise and destroy their master, and only by doing so would they prove themselves worthy of the title Darth. In this way, the Sith would shed their weakness over time, shedding skin after skin like a serpent becoming more venomous with each rebirth. Darth Bane trained Darth Zana, and she in turn trained a successor, the line continuing in secret across centuries, each new pair operating from the shadows, working not to conquer the galaxy in one sweeping gesture, but to rot it from within, patiently, strategically. These Sith masters embedded themselves in politics, religion, and war, whispering into the ears of kings, financing conflicts, pulling strings while the galaxy slept. The Jedi, for all their power, remained blind to the truth. The Sith had not been destroyed, they had simply grown silent, and in their silence they became more lethal. The Rule of Two bred monsters not only of strength but of vision. Darth Plagueis was one such Sith, manipulator of life itself, obsessed with creating immortality through midi-chlorian manipulation. His apprentice, Darth Sidious, embodied the rule's terrifying potential, surpassing all before him by not only killing his master, but by completing Bane's grand plan. He infiltrated the Republic, eradicated the Jedi, and ruled the galaxy not as a warlord, but as its emperor. His own apprentice, Darth Vader, was meant to carry the line forward, but was also viewed as a tool, maimed, broken, kept in place through pain and regret. Sidious, ever the architect, never fully embraced the rule's spirit. He sought multiple apprentices, clones, and successors, bending the doctrine to his will, believing himself the end of the line, the culmination of all Sith before him. But in doing so, he betrayed its essence. The Rule of Two thrived when it remained pure, when each apprentice truly surpassed their master, when the fire of ambition was not stifled but encouraged. But Sidious clung to power too long, and when Vader finally turned against him to save his son, the cycle shattered. No apprentice rose, no master remained. For the first time in a millennium, the line ended, and yet its legacy continues to fascinate and terrify. The Rule of Two is often mistaken for a limitation, but it was always a refinement. Where the Jedi built temples and trained armies, the Sith hid in the dark and became storms. Each pair was a fuse, short, violent, but capable of igniting galaxies. And even though the line is broken, the philosophy remains, coiled in ancient texts, echoing in corrupted holocrons, waiting for someone to rediscover it, to believe in it again. For as long as there are those who seek power without compromise, the Rule of Two may yet rise from the ashes, and with it, the Sith once more. Notable Sith Lords throughout history. To trace the history of the Sith is to walk a blood-stained path paved by names that echo like curses through the Force, each one a flame, in the dark, each one a chapter of terror, ambition, brilliance, and ruin. They were more than warlords or tyrants. They were visions incarnate, each believing they alone could bend the galaxy to their will, and for a time, some nearly did. The first to rise from the ashes of the 100-year darkness was Ajunta Paul, a former Jedi cast out for experimenting with forbidden powers, who fled to Korriban and became the first Dark Lord of the Sith. His legacy was that of sorrow and regret, for even he questioned the cost of what he had unleashed. Then came Marka Ragnos, a towering figure of strength and sorcery who ruled during the golden age of the Sith, keeping rivals like Naga Sadow and Ludo Kresh in check with sheer dominance. His death ignited a civil war that would spill into the Republic itself, as Naga Sadow launched the Great Hyperspace War, nearly toppling Galactic Order through illusion, alchemy, and reckless ambition. Millennia later, Exar Kun rose not from the Outer Rim, but from within the Jedi Order, brilliant, arrogant, seduced by ancient Sith knowledge. He turned on his teachers, forged a new Sith Brotherhood, and led a devastating war before binding his spirit to the temples of Yavin 4, his shadow lingering long after his body had turned to dust. Revan too was once a Jedi Knight, but his fall was unique, not born of hatred, but of vision. Seeing the Republic's fragility during the Mandalorian Wars, he embraced the dark side to save it, only to become what he feared. He established a Sith empire, trained legions of dark acolytes, and left scars across the stars before his eventual redemption. His apprentice Malak lacked his nuance and fell fully to rage, unleashing horrors like the destruction of Taris and the mass stripping of Jedi minds. Then came Darth Bane, the destroyer of the Brotherhood of Darkness and the architect of the Rule of Two. His mind was as sharp as his blade, and through patience and manipulation, he ensured the Sith's survival by condensing their chaos into a single, focused lineage. In the modern era, Darth Plagueis the Wise sought to transcend death itself, delving into the manipulation of life through midichlorians, but he was slain in his sleep by his apprentice, Darth Sidious. Sidious, or Emperor Palpatine, remains the most successful Sith in history, engineer of galactic collapse, executioner of the Jedi, and ruler of an empire forged not through invasion, but through fear and finesse. His mastery of deception, patience, and raw dark side power fulfilled Bane's grand plan in full, if only briefly. His apprentices were many: Darth Maul, raised in torment and trained as a living weapon; Count Dooku, or Darth Tyrannus, a fallen Jedi turned architect of the Clone Wars; and Darth Vader, the most tragic of all, once Anakin Skywalker, prophesied chosen one, twisted into a monster by loss and lies, yet ultimately redeemed through love. Beyond them, others flicker in legend. Darth Nihilus, the Lord of Hunger, whose very presence devoured the Force itself; Darth Sion, whose decaying body was held together by agony; Darth Trier, philosopher of betrayal and mistress of secrets; Darth Tenebrous, who foresaw the rise of the Chosen One but miscalculated its meaning; and Darth Zana, Bane's successor, a master of Sith sorcery and mental domination. Each Sith Lord left behind not just destruction, but doctrine, each one a fragment of a vast dark tapestry woven over millennia. And though their reigns have ended, their names endure in holocrons, tombs, and cautionary tales. They were the voices in the storm, the fire in the night, and the echo that still haunts the Force. To know them is to understand that the dark side is not just power, it is history personified. Lightsabers of the Sith: forms, colors, and purpose. The lightsaber, elegant and precise, is often called the weapon of a Jedi, but in the hands of a Sith it becomes something else entirely. Not a symbol of peace or discipline, but a manifestation of dominance, of fury, of pure focused will. Where the Jedi see the blade as an extension of defense and serenity, the Sith see it as an extension of themselves, of their rage, their ambition, their right to carve order into chaos. Sith lightsabers are almost universally crimson, their red hue not born of natural kyber crystals, but from corruption. The process, called bleeding, involves the Sith pouring their hatred into a kyber crystal, twisting it through pain and passion until it cries out in red. These crystals do not hum, they scream. The red blade is a scar on the Force itself, a constant reminder of the Sith's rejection of harmony and their embrace of raw, untamed emotion. But color is only the beginning. The Sith are innovators of terror, and their blades reflect this. Darth Maul wielded a double-bladed saber, a staff of spinning death that turned the battlefield into a storm of motion and aggression. Kylo Ren's unstable crossguard saber, crackling and volatile, mirrored his own fractured psyche. Count Dooku's curved hilt reflected elegance and precision, favoring Form 2, Makashi, a style focused on dueling, fencing, and the killing of Jedi. Darth Vader, towering and brutal, used a heavy single-bladed saber in tandem with Form V, Gemso, a form built around counterattacks and overwhelming force. The lightsaber forms practiced by Sith varied widely, but most leaned toward aggression. Form 7, Juyo, also called Vapad by the Jedi who tried to redeem it, was particularly favored for its chaotic, explosive style, channeling emotion into power. It required absolute control to avoid madness, a threshold the Sith walked without hesitation. Form 4-Ataru- was used by some Sith for its acrobatics and relentless assault, turning speed into violence. Others favored Form 3, Sorasu, when fighting Jedi, absorbing their patience before breaking them down. And beyond the known forms, some Sith developed their own savage hybrids, unbound by tradition, informed only by effectiveness and brutality. Their hilts, too, often carried personal significance. Many Sith constructed their sabers from dark metals, obsidian, or relic components, embedding them with runes, fangs, bones, or remnants of slain enemies. For the Sith, a saber was not sacred, it was a weapon to be honed, customized, and even discarded if a more lethal version could be made. Some wielded two, some wielded none, choosing force powers over blades. Others, like Exar Kun, fused Sith alchemy and technology to enhance their weapons beyond known limits. And there were artifacts, legendary sabers like the Darksaber, forged by Tara Vizsla, a Mandalorian Jedi, which later became a symbol of power through combat. Though not Sith in origin, it was coveted by Darksiders who understood its language, strength rules. In every duel, every strike, every hum and clash, the Sith saber tells a story, not of restraint, but of release, not of discipline, but of dominance. It is both tool and torch, igniting the battlefield and the soul. And though many of these blades now lie dormant in vaults or lost in ruins, their presence still lingers, waiting for another hand, another heart, another fury to awaken them. For a Sith's lightsaber is never truly gone, it simply sleeps, like the Order itself, always hungering for another chance to burn. Forbidden Force powers of the Sith. The Sith were never content with what the Force freely offered. They clawed deeper, demanded more, and shattered the barriers the Jedi dared not touch. To them, the Force was not a mystery to be respected, but a living current to be dominated, bent, and weaponized. Through centuries of study, suffering, and sacrifice, they unearthed abilities that warped the very fabric of life, death, and reality. These were not tricks of perception or slight enhancements of strength. These were forbidden powers, the kind that altered destinies, unraveled minds, and left scars on the galaxy itself. Force lightning, the most iconic of these, was not merely pain made visible, it was rage refined into energy, loosed upon the world in streaks of screaming light. Sidious wielded it like a conductor of storms, frying bone and spirit with flicks of his fingers. Darth Tyrannus used it with elegance, like a scalpel of torment, but that was only the surface. The Sith dug deeper. Darth Nihilus, hollowed by hunger, developed force drain to such an extent that he could consume entire populations, stripping every life form of its connection to the Force in one breathless moment. Darth Trier mastered Force Sever, the rare and cruel ability to cut another being off from the Force entirely, turning Jedi into empty vessels, incapable of ever touching the divine current again. Others, like Darth Bane, practiced Force-fought bombs, psychic implosions that consumed the souls of all Force users nearby, binding them into eternal torment. These powers were not elegant, they were monstrous. Sith sorcery, an even older tradition, descended from the teachings of ancient lords like Naga Sado and Frida Nad, wove dark energy into rituals that could summon illusions so real they could kill, bind spirits to physical objects, or reanimate the dead as puppets. These spells required preparation, incantations, blood, sacrifice, and the results were often irreversible. The amulets and talismans created through Sith alchemy carried curses, amplified pain, and corrupted the Force in their vicinity. The Sith also pioneered essence transfer, a perverse mastery of immortality, allowing a dying Sith to possess another body and overwrite its soul. Exar Kun attempted it. Palpatine perfected it. Through clones, through rituals, through arcane science, Sidious returned from death not once, but multiple times, tethered to life by hatred alone. This defiance of death was the ultimate taboo. The Jedi believed death to be part of the Force's balance. The Sith saw it as a limitation to be shattered. They created homunculi, abominations of life forged without mothers, vessels bred only to host power. Some Sith even experimented with time, seeking visions of the future not to understand, but to change, to manipulate. Force vision, when consumed by the dark side, became prophecy twisted by fear. Many Sith went mad trying to control what was never meant to be seen. And among the most terrifying gifts was mind control, far beyond the gentle suggestions of Jedi mind tricks. Sith domination broke Will completely, turning victims into slaves with no memory of their own. Their minds were shattered and rebuilt, molded to serve. The deeper a Sith fell, the more they blurred the line between force and sorcery, between science and nightmare. Their powers were born not of balance, but of obsession, each ability a wound in the Force. And though many of these arts are now lost, buried with their creators, or locked within cursed holocrons, the temptation remains. For to the desperate, the grieving, the power-hungry, the forbidden is always the most beautiful, and the dark side, forever patient, forever listening, still whispers the incantations in the quiet corners of the galaxy. Sith species, culture, and bloodlines. Before the Sith became a title, before it was whispered as a curse or written in holocrons, it was a name. A people, a species, a civilization of red-skinned beings who once walked the deserts of Korriban under blood-red skies, gazing at moons that never slept. The Sith species, native to Korriban and later Ziost, were not monsters. They were thinkers, warriors, mystics deeply attuned to the dark side of the Force in its rawest, most elemental form. Their culture was built not upon cruelty, but upon a reverence for strength, trial, and transcendence. They believed in personal ascension through conflict and in leaders who rose through challenge rather than inheritance. Their kings were sorcerers. Their priests could twist the Force into flame. Before the arrival of the Dark Jedi exiles, the Sith had their own language, their own scriptures, their own sacred rites. They practiced blood rituals to bind family lines to the Force, inscribed their tombs with spells that could guard their spirits for millennia, and passed down talismans from one generation to the next, each item becoming more than heirloom. It became memory carved into stone. When the fallen Jedi came, bringing forbidden knowledge and superior technology, the Sith saw gods and devils in equal measure. But rather than resist, they merged. The two bloodlines intertwined, and from this union was born something new. The Sith as an order, as a philosophy, no longer defined by species, but by allegiance to the dark. Pure-blooded Sith became rarer as centuries passed, their traits diluted, their language nearly lost, but their legacy was preserved in titles, in temples, and in the obsession with lineage. Even as the Sith evolved into an ideology, bloodlines continued to matter. Many Sith Lords sought to create dynasties, to breed successors who would inherit both genetic strength and a predisposition to the dark side. Others, like Darth Plagueis, sought to manipulate midi-chlorians directly, removing the need for natural bloodlines altogether. Sidious, in his pursuit of immortality, turned cloning into a new form of succession, replicating not just flesh, but power, ensuring that his essence could inhabit 1,000 vessels if needed. But true legacy to the Sith was never just in blood, it was in knowledge, in names. The Sith took on titles to honor the past. Darth Bane, Darth Revan, Darth Malgus. These were not just identities, they were claims to heritage, declarations that the darkness was not finished. And yet, despite their obsession with legacy, the Sith were also cannibals of their own culture. Each master sought to surpass all that came before, to destroy their teacher, to rewrite history in their own image. The result was a paradox, a civilization obsessed with continuity, yet addicted to destruction. Still, in forgotten corners of the galaxy, remnants of the original Sith species remain. Fossils, glyphs, statues with eyes that seem too knowing, and in some myths, told by hermits and wanderers, there are whispers of pure-blood Sith who escaped extinction, hiding in the unknown regions, preserving their rights in secret, waiting for the galaxy to forget before rising once more. Whether myth or truth, the legacy of the Sith species is inescapable. They were the first to show that the dark side was not born, it was found, and those who follow their path, whether in armor or robes, whether red-skinned or not, carry that ancient hunger in their veins. For the Sith were never just an order. They were a people, and their shadow stretches far beyond the fall of their empire. Jedi versus Sith, a war of ideologies. For over 1,000 generations, the Jedi and the Sith have stood on opposite ends of the same infinite thread, the Force, each interpreting its will, its purpose, and its boundaries through lenses so different that peace between them has always been impossible. Their conflict is not merely one of light and dark, or order and chaos. It is a war of belief, of philosophy, of identity. The Jedi believe in detachment, in harmony, in surrendering to the will of the Force. They see themselves as conduits, guardians, shepherds of peace, never rulers. They train their initiates to reject attachment, to let go of fear, anger, and desire, not because these things are inherently evil, but because they lead to imbalance. To the Jedi, power is responsibility, and responsibility must be exercised without personal ambition. But to the Sith, this is a lie, a cage, a denial of the self. The Sith believe that emotion is truth, that passion is power, and that by embracing what one truly feels, anger, love, hate, hunger, one can transcend the limitations imposed by dogma and weakness. To the Sith, the Force is not a current to be followed, it is a beast to be mastered. Where Jedi meditate, Sith manipulate. Where Jedi seek balance, Sith seek dominance. And at the core of this ideological rift is the question that has shaped galactic history. Should power be contained or unleashed? The Jedi have accused the Sith of tyranny, of corruption, of destruction, and not without reason. The Sith have wrought horrors upon the galaxy, from planet-wide purges to soul-consuming rituals. But the Sith argue that the Jedi's inaction, their refusal to intervene, to feel, to act decisively, is its own form of cruelty. Jedi let worlds burn in the name of neutrality. Sith burn worlds in the name of order. And between these extremes, civilizations rise and fall. Their wars have not only been waged with sabers and starships, but with students and secrets, with infiltrations and betrayals. The Sith have hidden among the Jedi, turned their brightest into monsters, whispered in the ears of their most trusted. The Jedi in turn have purged, exiled, and hunted, sometimes erring so far toward fear that they themselves became rigid, blind to nuance. Time and again, the cycle repeats. Jedi building, Sith destroy, Sith rise, Jedi fall. And then, the opposite. But underneath it all lies a deeper truth. The Force is neither Jedi nor Sith. It is beyond them both. It does not favor one side or the other. It moves endlessly and it responds to will. The Jedi seek to listen. The Sith seek to command. And yet, the greatest tragedies in history have often come from both extremes. Obi-Wan's silence, Anakin's fear, Yoda's blindness, Sidious's obsession. Perhaps the war between Jedi and Sith is not one of good and evil, but of imbalance versus overreach, of light that forgets to act and darkness that forgets to stop. In the end, it is the individual who chooses which voice to follow. And perhaps, in the quiet spaces between saber clashes and Senate chambers, there lies a third path, one that listens and leads, that feels and forgives. But as long as the Jedi teach restraint and the Sith teach release, their war will never truly end. It will only pause until the next generation hears the Force and asks the eternal question, should I serve it or make it serve me? The eternal return. Could the Sith rise again? The Sith are gone, their temples shattered, their bloodlines extinguished, their rule broken not by armies, but by the resilience of compassion and the quiet strength of a final redemptive choice. Their grand plan failed, their throne crumbled, and the galaxy now spins under new stars, far from the shadows of Korriban and Exegol. And yet, the question lingers in the quiet. Is this truly the end, or merely the breath before the return? History in the galaxy is not linear, it is cyclical. The Force itself moves like a tide, surging and receding, responding to balance and imbalance, light and dark. And the Sith have always known this. They did not prepare for years. They prepared for centuries. They left behind more than warriors and weapons. They left behind philosophies, artifacts and whispers. Holocrons slumber beneath ancient ruins, talismans pulse beneath ash-covered moons, and secrets, terrible, beautiful secrets, remain carved into the bones of dead planets, waiting for another hand to reach out and claim them. Even their failures teach future monsters how to succeed. The rule of two may be broken, but its wisdom still tempts. Strength through conflict, evolution through betrayal, mastery through desire. It is a design too alluring to vanish completely, and the darkness that once spoke through Sith Lords now finds new voices. Cultists, warlords, wayward Force users, disillusioned with Jedi restraint or seduced by the promise of forbidden power. They do not wear the name Sith, but their hearts speak the same language. They bleed crystals, they resurrect rituals, they rewrite fear into faith. The galaxy has forgotten the smell of burning temples, the sound of a voice wrapped in velvet and venom, but memory is fragile. The Force remembers. And so long as there is pain, so long as there is fear, so long as there is someone who feels powerless and dares to whisper, I want more, the dark side will answer. It always does. For the Sith were never just an order. They were a possibility, a temptation, a shadow that cannot be killed because it lives in the places where light is absent. And so the question is not, will they return, but who will call them back? In some forgotten corner of the galaxy, a child will fall, a student will question, a relic will awaken, and in the stillness of that moment, the Sith will breathe again. The cycle will turn, and darkness, ancient and patient, will rise once more.